I'm Jack Rutberg, and I'm very pleased to be able to present this fourth exhibition of works by George Nama here at Jack Rutberg Fine Arts. George represents an artist whose commitment to printmaking and sculpture has been formidable, and he's been recognized internationally with exhibitions and works collected in museums throughout the United States and Europe. Part of that great tradition of printmaking is the tradition of the artist book. And George, since, goodness, it must be the early 60s, created some extraordinary volumes with original etchings inspired by and inspiring others, such as the great late poet and art historian in France of Yves Bonnefoy, for example. The gallery has had the honor of presenting other such exhibitions of collaborations with the great poet Charles Simic, writings of Alfred Brendel, the great pianist. So in the great tradition of the early moderns, we see the tradition of artists converging with poets, composers, musicians, etc., in creating collaborative works. But rest assured, these are works by George Nama, not merely illustrations of something, but true collaborations. And what prompted this exhibition was a remarkable moment in our history, George's history as well, in that this exhibition celebrates a lifelong friendship with George Nama's very close friend, the late George A. Romero. George A. Romero, of the great filmmaker, the icon, essentially, of a particular genre of the horror film, most famous for Night of the Living Dead. But those of us not perhaps drawn to that genre may not realize the impact of George A. Romero, in that his films contained a socio-political message, a provocative commentary not often seen in that genre. And for that reason, George A. Romero is a legendary filmmaker who has had an impact on so many mainstream filmmakers. In recognizing their lifelong friendship, which really began as students when George A. Romero was an aspiring artist, the two went to school together at the Carnegie Tech in Pittsburgh. They had this long relationships, and observing both had been involved in collaborative work. There's no greater collaboration than that of a filmmaker. And George Nama, with his collaboration with close friends and admirers, the poets, etc., that Romero and Nama had never honored their lifelong friendship with a collaboration. And they decided to honor that friendship and finally collaborate with a work that catalyzed this exhibition into realization. So to honor their friendship, George Romero wrote a short story specifically for George Nama in this collaboration. And that short story is titled Liberator, and that is the name of this exhibition. We're so honored to present this exhibition and the very first exposure of this remarkable, poignant short story that was inspired by the ancient legend of the golem. And it's really a morality play on so many levels, and it's so natural that Romero would choose something that speaks to a being that emerges from the earth, this organic sort of presence, this powerful force, which I'll not say much about the story itself, but that Nama's own work seems to emerge from the earth in this very organic manner as well. And the collaboration here is a perfect one. The celebration of this friendship was to be a remarkable honoring of these two artists together. And it was to be timed with George Romero's being honored in Hollywood with a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. And I will tell you that in conversations, Romero was less excited about that than the exhibition itself, which would celebrate this long relationship. We see in George Nama's works these etchings that themselves feel like they were coming from the earth, these totemic forms, not abstract designs, but really emerge from nature. Are they vegetable? Are they animal? Are they mineral? So they're certainly personages, and they themselves have their own sort of unique force. There's this remarkable quality about these works that I would imagine had much to do with Romero's own desire to create a story that is as sympathetic to George Nama as George Nama's works would ultimately be sympathetic to George Romero's story. We have here these 7 remarkable black and white etchings and a beautiful early drawing that so clearly shows this quality that seems to have this rather surreal presence here. And we see here this remarkable portfolio of works of Liberator. Nama and Romero were so keen on making this a very special experience that Liberator, the short story, has not and will not be published in any other form than in this very rare series of etchings. This limited edition portfolio of some 35 copies with original etchings by George Nama and short story on the facing pages by George Romero, signed by both. And this is meant to be as precious as you see it here in its limitation. It's not typical for a writer to wish to have something limited, but Romero and Nama wanted this to be particularly special, and we are so privileged to present this series in an exclusivity. And through these works, we see the development of George Romero's story in the wonderful etchings, these hand-colored etchings by George Nama. The story speaks to a morality. It's a very poignant and powerful story that is relevant in our society today about the forces of good, the forces of evil, and the choices and consequences of those experiences. And in these wonderful etchings and typeset story on each plate, it comes to a close here where you see George Romero's signature in this very limited edition of 35, and Nama signs each individual etching. The story in its exclusivity has been discussed, and the only other publication of those words are in this catalog, which we have collaborated and published with the Shepard W&K Galleries in New York, who has also presented this exhibition with great pride. In this exhibition of more than 40 works by George Nama, we see also the mind of the artist, the preparatory works that, some that followed Liberator, but indeed preparatory works. And here we see a very typical approach of George Nama's technique. Part of his interest is in the utilization of materials that have had a life before his. And there's a certain exotic connection in the use of antique papers. In this case, in this wall of images, gouaches painted on antique music sheets and literary sheets, there's a kind of bleeding through on occasion that merely hints that this is something more than a static, perfect rendition, that this has had layers of experience, that he brings something new to that experience. And this is, again, is part of this organic quality that seems to have a living quality in George Nama's works. That organic quality that we see and the timelessness that we see, these connections in George Nama's works, are so evident in these remarkable large gouaches. These are antique papers. We can see text bleeding through, hinting at some other experience. But we also see this organic aspect in the application of materials throughout the work, sometimes leaves and grasses, and it's almost as though that Nama and Romero both are connecting something that came through the earth, the force of that organic quality and the presence of these beautiful images, this garden of figures. We see a kinship in George Nama's works with artists as diverse as Kurt Schwitters to Hannelore Baron to Giacometti. And George Nama has created a garden of sculpture and gouaches that has etched out his own turf. And what a proud moment it is in this gallery to bring together a celebration of both George Nama and George Romero. A celebration indeed, and also a memorial tribute to the great George A. Romero.